In this lesson, we shall look at some of the different charts within the Jeppesen manual and discover some of the problems involved in planning a route. We shall start by using a European low-level chart, ELO 2. Open the chart and identify Dover VOR at 51 degrees 9 minutes north, 1 degree 21 minutes east, and Montdidier VOR at 49 degrees 33 minutes north, 2 degrees 29 minutes east. Once you have found them, use a highlighter to make them easy to identify during the lesson. Let us assume we have to route from overhead Dover to overhead Montdidier by the shortest available route. At first glance, it would seem that the shortest route is via Boulogne VOR at 50 degrees 37 minutes north, 1 degree 54 minutes east. But this would take us along a one-way airway, Bravo 24, the wrong way. We shall have to route along Bravo 3 to Cambrai and then Alpha 5 to Montdidier. Having established the route, we need to look for any restrictions that may apply. As we depart Dover on a radial of 133 degrees, the first part of the airway has a minimum en route level of flight level 70. Using the semicircular flight rules, we shall have to fly at flight level 70 or above. After a distance of 29 nautical miles from Dover, there is a compulsory reporting point, tracker. Because we have established a flight level of 70 or above, we come into Paris Control Sector Tango Bravo 2, which operates above flight level 65, on a frequency of 128.27. As we approach Cambrai, note that the TACAN and the VOR are not co-located. Overhead Cambrai, we turn right on a track of 216 magnetic. This would normally entail changing to an even flight level. However, as our new airway, Alpha 5, uses even flight levels in a northeasterly direction as shown, we can therefore maintain the odd flight level, provided we are below the maximum authorized altitude of flight level 140. The two compulsory reporting points, Perron and Nessler, do not apply to airway Alpha 5. Neither does the reporting point at Montdidier, as this is an on-request reporting point for Alpha 5. Once you have understood how we have gleaned so much information along such a short route, turn to chart E-5. The example route in this case will be much longer and involve several folds in the map. The route is from overhead Moulins, 46 degrees 42 minutes north, 3 degrees 38 minutes east, to Limoges, 45 degrees 49 minutes north, 1 degree 1 minute east, to Cognac, 45 degrees 39 minutes north, 0 degrees 18 minutes west, and finally to join the North Atlantic track system at 47 degrees north, 8 degrees west. Identify these positions on the chart and mark the route and waypoints with a highlighter if necessary. The start of the route will take us from overhead Moulins on a radial of 247 along airway Upper Gulf 21. This airway uses even flight levels in a northeasterly direction. Therefore, we have to use an odd flight level as we are going the other way. We will assume a flight level above 320. Next, we find the relevant air traffic control radio frequencies. However, this is not a straightforward process. Note the border marked by the telephone symbols and the ball flag A and its corresponding information box, which directs us to the cover panel. Looking at the front panel, we can see two rectangular boxes, which are entitled Radio Communication Sectors and Frequencies. Since we are flying at flight level 320, we will be concerned with the bottom box. We will place the bottom box on screen in front of the main map, so we can better visualize where our route is in the radio communications box. By comparing the two maps, it is possible, although it will take a little time, to identify the telephone symbol boundaries as shown. This allows us to approximately draw our route on the radio communication box as shown. You can now see that our route passes through three sectors. The first sector is divided into the two areas: a lower area, Uniform Tango, from flight level 245 to flight level 320, and an upper level, Tango Uniform, from flight level 320 upwards. Since we are at flight level 320, we will use Tango Uniform and communicate on 132.37. The next radio sector is NV, with frequency 133.92. And then Uniform Victor on 135.90. Finally, after leaving the Uniform Victor sector boundary, we will change to Bordeaux control on 133.57. Overhead Limoges, we turn right onto a track of 265 magnetic on the airway marked NAT, which forms a part of the North Atlantic track system. Just after Limoges, we'll have to change frequency to a different Bordeaux control frequency on 133.22. Arriving at Cognac, notice the VOR and TACAN at Cognac are not co-located. Overhead Cognac, we turn onto a track of 291 magnetic. Clearance must now be obtained before any aircraft can enter the Shanwick Oceanic Control Area. The bold telephone symbols, shown along longitude 1 degree west, remind us that confirmation of clearance must be obtained before entering the Oceanic. This is in addition to having to file a flight plan prior to departure. Instructions for this are detailed in the panel at the bottom of the chart, between 4 west and 5 west. High-level charts are generally less cluttered than the low-level charts, and therefore easier to use. However, all upper airways and routes are in controlled airspace, so strict adherence to air traffic rules and procedures is vital, both in flight and in pre-flight planning. Other charts which are relevant to the JAA exam are the North Atlantic plotting charts and the Polar High Altitude chart, which we shall look at next. Take another look at the route we have just covered, and then take out of the folder Chart CA High 4. Open it to show fold 3 and 4. The outstanding feature of this chart is the rapidly changing magnetic variation, where the isogonals converge at the magnetic pole. Navigation with reference to magnetic north would be difficult in this area. It is common practice in this part of the world for the VORs to be orientated to true north. Examples of this are the VORs at Resolute Bay at position 74 degrees 43 minutes north, 94 degrees 55 minutes west, and Cambridge Bay at position 69 degrees 7 minutes north, 105 degrees 10 minutes west. When you are ready, take out the Polar High Altitude chart, 5 AT high. The Polar High Altitude chart differs in many respects from the Enroute charts we have looked at so far. Firstly, it is a polar stereographic projection and not a Lambert's projection as the previous charts are. Because of the convergence of the meridians at the pole, it is necessary to use grid navigation on this chart. Grid north follows the direction of the prime meridian and is shown by the broad blue line superimposed over the 0-degree longitude line. Other grid lines are also shown as thick blue lines 10 degrees of longitude apart. Some airways show the direction in both degrees true and degrees grid. An example is airway PTS2, starting at reporting point Gonut, at position 61 degrees north, 4 degrees 35 minutes west. This shows that the airway direction is 342 degrees true and 347 degrees grid. If you are uncertain about the relationship between true and grid, a note on the front panel states that grid bearing equals the true bearing plus west longitude or minus east longitude. The rules governing the planning of flights between Europe and Alaska are shown in a table at the top of the front panel, along with the height bands for the Arctic, northern and southern control areas. Another major difference between this chart and the others we have looked at is the depiction of the grid minimum off-route altitude, MORA. The grid MORAs in this chart are effective between the tick marks, as seen on chart ED6, and not between the latitude and longitude lines. In this lesson, we have covered all of the major points that you are likely to encounter in the JAA exam, with the exception of the North Atlantic plotting chart. Before moving on, make sure you are familiar with the differences between this chart and the others. Also ensure that you are familiar with the relationship between directions in degrees true and degrees grid.